special meeting of February 8th to discuss the North Ridge part of the island. Tricia, could you make the roll call, please?
Certainly, sir. Mr. Brown?
I'm here.
Mr. Ames?
Here.
Mrs. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mayor McCann?
Here, and Mr. Hawkins is on the Cross Island getting his change ready to pay for the toll booth. He has to get change, okay? So, well, thank you all for being here this morning. Brian's group and everything has worked very hard putting his presentation together. Terry, are you pointing at somebody, or are you just, okay, I thought you were pointing at somebody. You know, putting his presentation together. We met with his group last night, and we're very excited about what they're going to present today. What I'd like to do this morning, I'll introduce Mark, and Mark will tell you not about the park, which is a piece of land right now, but about the whole community, the whole district that we're trying to work on to come out of this with one district change rather than just one piece of land. They'll give their presentation. We'll take questions from the council, and time permitting, we'll take questions from the audience. It is good to have people back in front of us. It's good to have the council back together again along the way. I think it's really important that we work together, and we'll be back in public for as long as you really can along the way. If you're patient in waiting for us to come back, but we did the right thing at the right time, and I appreciate it. Mark?
Yes, sir. Morning, Mayor, Council, members of the public. There's 3 items on the agenda today, and we have with us Brian Kinzelman with MKSK and his great team here, and they'll introduce themselves as we dive into it. But I thought I would just really explain what we're after today and really leading into the future on these 3 projects, right? Today, we're here to look at the Mid-Island Redevelopment District. First and foremost, that's been our priority project for some months. And as directed by Town Council, staff's been working with MKSK on a redevelopment / reinvestment strategy in the Mid-Island area. We all know what the opportunities and challenges are. But we're trying to identify catalytic public projects and catalytic private real estate investment opportunities. But I think it's important that we're clear that we're trying to help revitalize some of the commercial area in the Mid-Island District, but we're also working to preserve neighborhood, to enhance our quality of life in the surrounding areas, especially as they surround the airport. Second, the Mid-Island Tract. Today, we're just going to hear some assessment of public input to date, an assessment of a site analysis, and a real in-depth look at the 103-acre town-owned property, formerly known as the Planners Row Golf Course, with the overall, I would say, ultimate goal to establish a master plan for that 103-acre tract. Again, plugging back into the redevelopment district, a public space as a catalyst for reinvestment. And then lastly, island-wide conditions and trends. And I've been a part of a conversation here for a while with you now, where I keep hearing, and we continue to talk, that we seek to enhance and preserve our community, and we hear a lot about resiliency, we hear a lot about capacity as it relates to the environment, infrastructure, economics, and a whole bunch of other elements. And we know, there'll always be a desire to identify some sort of acceptable level of community equilibrium. And we talk a lot about that. What's our capacity? How do we stay current? How do we make sure that we are innovative and relevant along the way? And that this assessment is intended to provide as much information as possible. I wrote a word down that I came across. It's a community appraisal. It's an interesting way to look at it, to learn as much as possible by collecting and analyzing data about Hilton Head Island and our region. And then I think we have some decisions to make along the way. How are we going to use this information once we know it? Really, we seek to determine a level of community development that we aspire to. And so today we're here to kick off all 3. To me, all 3 need to be done together. It's a lot of work, and without the hard work of Jen and Sean and Ann and a whole bunch of others, we wouldn't be this far along. And I know that we have some good thinkers and some folks at the table that have a love and desire to help us in Hilton Head, but also a lot of experience elsewhere. So with that, turn it over to.
Yeah, before we jump with Brian, everybody always wonders, why are we seated in the order we're seating in, okay? The council members are seating in order by ward number, so there's no magical formula how we're sitting where we're sitting. And Brian and his crew is sitting down the other end, so they can not only address the council, but the public that's here today. With that, Brian, it's yours.
Here. Thank you, Mayor, Mr. Manager, and council members. Thrilled to be here. First and foremost, Mark, you touched upon, I want to thank staff for all the hard work they're doing on this effort. This isn't just us. We're partnering with your very capable staff, and their brain power is very important to us. I appreciate that. And public, thanks for attending. As Mark suggested, we really have three parts to this presentation. We're going to try to move with some pace so we don't put anyone to sleep. Feel free to ask questions or make comments along the way if you care to wait till the end for each of these three incremental parts, and we ask questions at that juncture. That's fine by us as well. With me is Kyle May, Andrew Overbeck, Tony Rell, and myself, and a cast of thousands behind us that aren't here today. Andrew and Kyle have been concentrating on the district planning. Tony and I have been focused on the Mid-Island Tract, but there's no light between the two. As you suggested, Mark, this is all one place, one thing. And then we're just now kicking off this conditions and trends assessment as well. So all of us will be involved in all of that. With that, I'm going to start with Andrew Overbeck and let him go through the district analysis and our thinking du jour, and then we'll get into the tract.
Greetings. Nice to be with you all of you this morning. As Brian has alluded to, we've got a couple sections to get through, but we'll start by reviewing some of the input we received from the community. We had, great support from the community in providing input. Town staff did a great job with some open park day events where more than 225 people came out and gave some feedback. We had now more than 100 different stakeholders that we've met with through this process. And then the survey that you all host on the town's website, I think, got the most responses it's ever gotten. So 1,000 plus responses to that survey. So we've taken all of that into account. We've had great stakeholder meetings, some of which are some of the stakeholders are here in the room today, in addition to many others. So you can see we had a pretty wide cross-section. The community we were able to have more sort of one-on-one small group discussions with. And again, the in-park events help to get people out onto the site itself and experience it and be out in the space in the Mid-Island Tract. Just want to review a few summary findings, and again, this is sort of combining all that in-person and the online interaction together. So a majority of people that came out to those events or took the survey are daily or weekly visitors to the Mid-Island area. They are primarily shopping, living, and dining. So those are the types of things that people are already doing in the district. And the kinds of things they would like to see happen. So we asked, what are the things that are missing? And I think because of the idea of a park was so sort of fresh in people's minds, it's not surprising that that's the top answer there. But I think you start to put these other answers together and you start to see a different type of community forming, a different type of district forming. Walkable streets was the second most answered. Dining, community events, shopping, and then workforce housing. So a knowledge, I think, within the community that we need different types of housing than maybe what we have on offer today. So really interesting to see that cross-section of responses, the desire to make it a place, but also one that's very human focused. Then we sort of asked open-endedly, what do you want to see happen in this space? What else should we be aware of? So this was, anyone can answer in any way that they want. We sort of collapsed some of those answers into some common themes for both the Mid-Island Tract and the district. So you can see as people were thinking about the Mid-Island Tract, certainly more of a desire for a passive park, nature opportunities, something that's maybe a little different than some other spaces across the island. As people talked about the district, traffic, safety, infrastructure, I think we'll talk a little bit more about how do we get people across the parkway, join two sides of the district together. Improving walkability, also top of the list, in addition to adding some vitality to those neglected commercial shopping centers and starting to think about different types of housing potentially in the district as a whole. So those were all things that we've sort of taken into account as we started to then attach this to some analysis that we've started to do. But in sort of providing a little bit of a summary of engagement themes for the district, I think everyone sees the Mid-Island Tract as a catalyst for that change. The desire to create a walkable district to address the condition of existing commercial shopping areas, addressing needs for workforce and affordable housing in the district, and creating unique identity. This is a place that I think people could see being elevated and being part of that character of the island. As it relates to the tract, again, more passive types of park uses instead of active. The desire to connect this piece of ground to all the other green spaces in the general area, create an interconnected network of green spaces, parks, and trails. Again, enhancing those natural features that exist on the site today. Definitely talked to a group from the historic neighborhoods about how do we celebrate and embrace the Gullah history and culture on this site. Talked to them about open air market, heritage garden, potentially a cafe, ways that we could sort of bring that into this community resource. And really a place for the entire community, whether you're a resident, whether you're a visitor, it's a place that people want to come to. We'll talk a little bit about housing as part of that, potentially evaluate that a little bit later on today. And then obviously when we talk about public improvements, got to have a focus on phasing that, being responsible in terms of what that looks like in terms of maintenance and operations as well from a design standpoint. So those are some things that we've gleaned from the community engagement, really help to provide some direction. And when you start to put this together with some of the analysis that we've done of existing conditions, you can start to see some recommendations coming together that we'll close on today. But first and foremost, the study area we looked at when we defined the district, primarily looking Broad Creek out to historic Mitchellville, Freedom Park, Beach City Road, and then Union Cemetery. So those are generally the boundaries, although it obviously, jigs and jogs around all of those edges. But that's primarily the area that we've been looking at. So you'll see that sort of analysis and all of these diagrams sort of capturing that district. We started to look at the natural systems. This is really important as we think about the future of the district, making sure that it's resilient and that we are respecting sort of the natural features on these sites. So here you see all the different drainage areas that we're working through here. And I'll step through some of this analysis with some key takeaways. So we look at the hydrography of the site, Oak Creek Drive, really that dividing point between freshwater, saltwater, and that also provides a bit of a buffer to some of the other things that we looked at later on here with sea level rise and storm surge. Obviously looking at this great system of both, town-owned ground, conservancy areas, really a great opportunity to link a lot of these together. You see that as a common theme in our work today is how do we link these great green open spaces together, and you've done a good job of that already, but how do we continue to reinforce that? As I mentioned, the 500-year flood, you can see that sort of is covering all of the Mid-Island Tract, but you can see most of the rest of these sort of natural areas are the ones that are providing that buffer and that 500-year flood. But again, we need to be cognizant of that as we think about what can happen in the Mid-Island Tract and be responsible about that.
Andrew, may
yes.
I just interrupt for just a second? It's my recollection that Hilton Head has had 2 500-year floods in the last 50 years. So it's important to look at that as something that is actuarially maybe accurate, but not necessarily climatically.
Right. Other piece, obviously, we're paying attention to, I think everyone sort of acknowledges that 1 foot sea level rise is something we're going to see or are already seeing. And you start to see where that starts to be an intrusion. So we get to looking at storm surge. Again, category 1, not a major impact. But as you start to get into category 2 and 3 on this site, the Mid-Island Tract especially, you can start to see that impact in a category 2 and a 3. Again, category 3, we've got a lot of other problems as well, but again, we wanted to make sure we looked at that and understood what all of that meant as we think about improvements to this area.
Andrew, could you
Yes.
please go back a couple of slides where you identify responsible parties for land, in particular the Ashmore, am I pronouncing that correctly? Tract. Where are we on defining in perpetuity disposition of that land? Are we clear that we can't touch that?
According to Curtis's position, the land was acquired with funds that do not allow for a redevelopment scenario.
Well, the reason I ask that is I think there's some disparity of thought or opinion on that from people that can't advance a cogent argument. So I would just respectfully request that, not that we challenge Curtis, but we look at another opinion too.
We'll definitely,
And I bring that up because we have to know the canvas, the size of the canvas we're playing here. And if that's off limits, so be it. But if it's not, then
I support what Bill is saying, but would also ask the town manager to talk to the mayor at the time and other people who were here at the time, because there was an extraordinarily strong commitment to that being open space at the time the public funded it.
All right.
certainly something that we're, understand the need to get verification of that, and Brian will talk a little bit more about that as we talk about the Mid-Island Tract.
thank you.
And I think David's right, it's important to talk to Tom Peoples, because he was around in those days too, to see what the intention was.
Right, and also,
Besides the letter of law, what the intention was.
well, intention's important, but the written record is even more important.
They're both important.
The other piece that we're obviously very cognizant of, and I think that, brings this area its vitality, are the 23,000 residents that live on the north side of the island. So these established neighborhoods, extraordinarily important. We want to link both sides of the parkway together. We'll talk a little bit more from a market standpoint, where that sort of stable base of neighborhood residents comes to bear. We're also looking at the existing roadway network. We'll talk a little bit more about this in some of our analysis findings. But again, looking at the current character of roadways, what can we do to improve safety? Again, key comment from the community on that. How do we get people around, and how do we get people across the parkway safely? What improvements might be necessary for some of the surrounding roads? And then as we look at the bike and pedestrian network, the desire to have a bike path on both sides of the parkway. Here we only have it on one side. What are some improvements we could make to the existing condition? We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment as well. Obviously looking at existing land use and zoning and sort of what uses are supported in the district. Critical as we start to think about addressing some of the community voice that said that these commercial shopping centers could use some revitalization, and then how do all those things fit together with the growth that the airport anticipates, some things that they're planning in terms of terminal and building expansion and some of those needs. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And then, of course, we're working with the town to have a conversation with the FAA so we better understand what those airport limitations might be on some of these surrounding parcels, so that we understand where we can go with what types of development. And again, we're still working through some of that due diligence at the moment, but very keenly aware that that plays an impact in the ability of some of this redevelopment to take place. Want to touch on some market analysis that was done, again, looking at the north part of the island. As we look at 20-year demand, going out to 2041, what types of housing demand there might be, and again, looking at population trends, relatively stable population, the need for another 1,500 to 1,750 units of housing. Again, as we start to think about what types of housing that is, how can we make it so that people aren't having to come to the island for work? There's ability for people to live and work on the island, really key. Additional retail square footage, 160 to 180,000 square feet. Additional office, 55 to 75,000 square feet. Industrial space, again, some moderate demand for that. And then looking at hospitality, anywhere between 100 and 250 hotel rooms. The market folks like to call it keys, but that's what that means. But I think all of these things, we
Andrew,
look-
let me ask you a question about that. Go back to that previous slide, please. You've included office in there about needing 55 to 75,000 square feet. You've probably got almost that much vacant right here now. I just don't see the demand for office at that level over the next 20 years. My crystal ball is not very clear, but that's kind of hard to accept.
Yeah, and I think, that's not to say that that's what's going to happen, it's what could happen. And you will have the tools in place to decide what the mix ought to be. And I think it's really key, gross square footage is one thing, but I think the really thing to focus on here are the market considerations and what drives that square footage. So when we're looking at housing, the need is for a lot of different types of housing products. Detached, attached, market rate, multifamily, different types of active adult or senior housing. All of that types of housing are sort of needed across, to become that life cycle community. And then when it comes to things like retail, where that number might be a little bit surprising, all of that is, I think, very much driven by the kind of place you're creating. So if you make this investment in public space and community gathering space on the Mid-Island Tract, that sort of changes the game a little bit. And so I think when we talk about retail now, we're not thinking big box, we're thinking about neighborhood scale retail that's serving people that might be coming to that new community hub that are living nearby. That's the type of retail that we're thinking about as we look into the future, and especially as we start to think about mixing some of these uses together. And it's exactly the same with office.
Andrew?
Yeah.
Just for clarity, when a market study is done, does the consultant consider a community's comprehensive plan, or are they completely separate?
These are sort of gross numbers, right? So these are sort of what the market will bear. And so then it becomes a job of how do we take that and interpret it down. We're not saying this is going to happen and we're trying to find a space for 200,000 square feet of retail. It's not.
I was just trying to
that's
make
not, yeah, that's not what we're trying to do.
that these are gross numbers, and
Yeah.
we as a community have an impact on.
Correct, absolutely. And that's exactly right. We want to say this is what is possible. How do we shape it? What do we want it to look like? Which is really, I think, the next step in this process. So again, it goes back to what are those drivers and what is the market looking for? So the office is, again, I think can be something that's serving those neighborhood services, thinking about things, small medical office, urgent care, those types of facilities. And again, on the light industrial, airport serving uses, I think because the airport's here, we see some opportunity there. And then potentially because of the airport, maybe some additional hospitality as well. So again, all of these things we sort of take into consideration, and then we look at where on the ground some of those things could be. So these are sort of other anchors that we see. The established neighborhood, I think, is a key part of this, that we've got 23,000 folks that are living here full-time that need access to services. I think that's why they told us what they told us in the survey results. And then we look at the ability to start to look at the existing retail centers. Do we try and mix in some of these other uses we're talking about, whether that's some housing, whether that's different types of a retail experience? And again, this is where it gets into the connectivity, because we've got commercial centers that are sort of enclosed entities. They don't connect out to the broader district. So we've got some thoughts here about how you might start to interconnect some of these uses together and have them function in a way that I think the community is really looking for them to function. So that sort of gets us to some initial recommendations. And again, we're still waiting on a couple pieces of information to complete this work. But we are challenging ourselves with some of the questions the community asked us. How do we start to look at the commercial shopping centers in maybe a different way? What are some things around the airport that are opportunities that might not be taken advantage of currently? But I think it all goes back, and especially important as we start to make public investment, to what that space looks like. And again, we are sort of continuing to start from this integrated green network that exists when you look at it on a map, but how do we start to connect these spaces together? And again, bridging across the parkway as a key element to that. You'll start to see some thoughts we have about the sort of existing commercial areas along the parkway, down Matthews, actually looking over to the Modern Classics site that the town owns. It's sort of covered up here by that label. But again, where are those opportunities to start to mix in something a little bit different, whether that's office, whether that's a different type of retail, potentially some housing in those areas. We think there's some opportunity to do that as we look ahead and provide more people in those places all the time, as opposed to a one size all fits development.
Yeah, understanding as well as Andrew mentioned earlier, we've got to adjudicate between the airport's guidelines and restrictions, what can and cannot be built near the airport and that glide path. And then what does that mean to potential mix of use? You know, how tall can you go? What kinds of uses? What sort of density? But those, Sea Turtle is obviously just recently redeveloped and it continues to do so, but Northridge and Port Royal appear to us to be ripe for redevelopment. The days of that diagram of retail are going away. Same with office. Councilman, you made mention of the vacancies of office that we have on the island. Office usage and accoutrements are changing by the day. What office we do have on this island, to grossly characterize, is aging and maybe of a different model, I'll say. So that office and that retail and the neighborhood offerings need to be forward-looking, not just retrofitting what we have today with a fresh coat of paint, as it were, which I think is really exciting
May I
opportunity.
just, so I know I've said this before, I always get startled by photos that are included. And so when I look at this particular page, I see photos that I hope aren't representative of what it is that the mindset would be on in terms of development. And my suggestion would to keep in mind the character of Hilton Head and the overall impression that we have for each other that we want to provide, the type of neighborhoods that we really want to live in. And these photos don't, in my mind, fit that. So I just want to make sure that we're separating what we see as a photo from what it is that, while I don't want to place everything everywhere and micromanage, I certainly do want to make sure we start with a concept that's consistent with island character and what it is that our residents expect to see.
I think those photos are more about demonstrating the concept of a mix of use.
I understand that. It's just,
but-
every time I see a photo, some folks, and myself included, very well may say, did you see what they're going to build?
That's right, yeah. I'm with you, and that's the danger we run. People like myself are attracted to, what's the color of that building, what's the architectural
The
style.
size of it,
And
the scope.
The
yeah.
concept is in mix of use. I know I preach to the choir, it isn't just mixing uses to create a comprehensive neighborhood within those purple zones, but it's also mixing those uses vertically as well. Going to the whole idea of office.
Brian?
There may be smaller office suites on second floors.
The term mixed use, I think, is a neutral term. I think synergy of use explains much better what we're really trying to get to.
Point well
Fair
taken.
points.
And one of the character, and just keeping on this, because it is important to me, so I'm going to say it again, just one more thing about it. Again, seeing visually buildings and whatever they represent individually on top of the street, right? So Hilton Head is known for keeping things more natural, keeping things a little bit tucked away from that visual pollution that, in my mind, something like this, where the buildings are right on top of the walkways and the roadways would represent.
Yeah,
So.
and we'll get into, we'll have a chance, I think, after today to explain this a little bit better, but yeah, I wouldn't say these would be fronting.
I know, and I know it's a horrible thing to
Right.
pick
No,
up
no,
on
it's
because
not.
I
It's
realize
not.
that they're just
No.
pictures,
Yeah.
but I just want the intention from
Yeah.
my perspective.
Totally understood.
Understood.
Totally understood. Likewise, we're looking at that sort of triangle here adjacent to the airport, potential airport serving uses as they continue to sort of have a larger terminal and building and the sort of support services that are needed. That's a place where there might be some change in that area. Looking at other places where there might be residential infill. Again, infill may not be a very understandable term, but not that the whole thing. We look for places to carefully insert some different types of residential into some existing areas. There might be more than we've considered at this point, but we think there's some opportunities to do that as well in a very sensitive, context-sensitive way. And then how do we connect all these things together? Again, we're drawing some very loose diagrams at the moment. As we start to get into some detail around, say, Port Royal Plaza, how might you start to inject some neighborhood streets or some retail streets that start to provide some greater connectivity as opposed to development that's sort of looking in on itself? How do you start to connect some of these things together? So starting to think about the different types of streets. You have sort of engineering categories for streets, but we start to think about what is the character. What is a park adjacent street or a neighborhood street or that retail street that might be interior to a development that starts to give a little bit more of that connectivity. And then, of course, the parkway itself, and starting to think about where do we may have space to have separated uses for bikes and pedestrians, and interweaving those paths together, helping people with facilities get across the street with safe crossings. All those things we're starting to think a little bit more about. We'll talk about more with the Mid-Island Tract today. But generally speaking, when we put together the community input and the analysis that we've done, sort of heading in this direction of creating a more compact, walkable, vibrant district, addressing the vacancy and vitality of existing development, not always just sort of focusing on what's new square footage, how do we take advantage of what you have today, broadening the supply of housing where able, interconnecting both sides of the parkway together, these neighborhoods that are on either side really seamlessly joining them together, and then preserving and investing in community serving park open community space as a district anchor. That's key when you look at the market considerations, that having that anchor, that community catalyst is really, really important to having everything else in the district sort of come to life. So investing in that public infrastructure is incredibly important. So I want to pause here. I'll give the clicker here to Brian, but pause here for any discussion before we move on to
Yes, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew, taking us through that. Just a few items as we talk about the district as a whole. I think it's important that we recognize that this particular area is also overlaid by federally assigned opportunity zones, okay?
That's right.
And I'm one of not very smart on what that means and what the potentials are, or the pros and cons, so to speak, okay?
Right.
So I think as we move forward with a more tightened set of recommendations, that we include that and help us understand a bit more what can and cannot happen when it relates to opportunity zones. The recommendations that you have up here, I like those. I wanted to just add to them a bit. When it comes to the supply of available housing, you have I guess you have a number in here as a projection as to where we're trying to get to based on, I guess, a market study, not necessarily germane to Hilton Head.
Right.
I think for us, understanding where we are at the moment is so key, not just with housing, but as Councilman Stanford said, with the commercial also, and help us to identify the gaps as we project those numbers. I think we'll be in a better place moving forward. We touched on the airport, and at least in my mind, I kind of want to change the message in there. It sounds like we're approaching the airport to find out what the limitations are from the FAA, but I think it needs to be turned the other way, where we're saying, what are the limitations as far as the airport is concerned for us as a community? We don't want our Mid-Island district to turn into just an airport.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And I guess the only other point that I will make is the quality of life for this entire district is so important. Not much of what we've drawn lines around are protected by an outside covenants, like a PUD, okay? So the decisions that we make are gonna be critical, particularly since there's not a whole lot of open land left, okay? How we assure protection of quality of life moving forward for those that live in the area, I think is vital to this. And I'm not quite sure that that's called out on this particular slide. So those are my comments, and again, I think we're going in the right direction.
Those have any comments before we move on?
Well,
Yes, David.
I'll ask one. Where you're proposing mixed use or synergy uses on private property, I think it's important for all of us to understand the process. So we're drawing lines that have implications on private property ownership. How does a town influence private property owners to do what the plan sets out to do?
Yeah, and that's a fair question in almost every community in which we work. And I think, part of it is a reflection of what we heard from the community. That, they said, and we've certainly all observed it, but we heard this from the community. These are concerns of theirs, is the quality of those commercial areas. I think part of it, in the most optimistic, viewpoint is you present an opportunity for them to do something different, and maybe they take that into account, or they see that opportunity to maybe, do something in a different way than they had been in the past. So I don't think this is necessarily saying this has to happen this way. We're going to tell you what to do. It hopefully is an opening, part of a conversation.
Don't
with
misunderstand
folks.
me. I think
Yeah.
this is very important, and I applaud you for proposing it. But I think it's important for the council to understand, and also the public to understand, that we have zoning opportunities, we have subdivision,
Right.
so on and so forth, that we can begin to influence
Yeah.
in a government way how people see an area, and then we have the opportunity to invest public capital dollars to enhance that possibility. So
Absolutely.
the only other thing I would say is a detail. When Mayor Peoples was mayor of the island, he made a commitment in his head that while he was mayor, there would be a 150-foot setback from 278 right-of-way. And so I think conceptually it's important to preserve 278's driving experience, to have as much vegetation as possible, but that also gives us the opportunity to accent those areas that are commercial. So it's a combination of doing what's appropriate and tasteful and commercial, but also preserving as much of that tree-lined experience down 278.
Mark?
Yes, getting back to Mr. Ames' question, and I'll jump in from the government perspective. Where do we go once we have these great recommendations coming out of the Mid-Island District? It's about setting a district in place as a redevelopment reinvestment district. We can use that to build our capital improvement program, intersections, pathways, open spaces, whatnot, land acquisitions. We can also put in place a future land use map that is the intended land use. We can help people, we can entice folks to rezone, up, down, sideways, different. We can also go through a community-wide rezoning, which is a little more difficult, but it's an option, not preferred always, but an option. And then we can set the conditions in the land management ordinance, the zoning and development standards that are calibrated to accomplish the key visions. And so there's a bit of a step 1, 2, 3 after this. Future land use map, align your zoning, put your development standards in place, acquire, build your cap project, set your conditions, and and this is the big first step. So to answer your question, there's a plan.
And just one last comment, Andrew. I really appreciate the four themes: catalyst, walkable, affordable housing, and unique identity. I think those are incredibly important as goals, as themes of this project. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
A question for Mark. Mark, when do you think the master plan will be completed for this area?
What do you say, a week, Brian?
Yeah, 10 days. Mark.
No, I don't know. I'll have to defer to the
on the final
project
slide,
manager on schedule. But
Final
we anticipate bringing this forward, when? Help me, someone?
Here you go, Mayor.
Third quarter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
May I also make a comment? On page 28, the market analysis, it's an interesting set of numbers and points. Not sure necessarily where the data from for the analysis came from, which would be interesting. But it's kind of the cart before the horse in some respects, right? Because letter C on our discussion for today and work, I think that has to be first, is the island-wide conditions and trends assessment, which starts to speak to what our real capacity is. Right, and so until we have that as our first set of data points, these fit into that. This doesn't drive what we're willing to accept.
Exactly right.
No,
And
absolutely
that's,
not.
I think, I don't want to lose sight of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 decades of absorption, I'll point that out. We also looked at sort of how many housing starts there were last year, to sort of look at that. You know, there's population growth, which Kyle will touch on here in a little bit. And then there's also how many housing starts we experience as a community. So it started baking all that in. Again, we're not going out here and looking for homes for all of this. It just tells us what is possible, so that when we talk about things that are a little tired and worn out, well, what might they be replaced with? So again, this is just a snapshot. It gives us a sense of where the market is, what the opportunity might be, and we sort of go from there. But we're not looking for places to, shoehorn in all of these different uses.
Understood, and I think the key word of what you just said was replace. So some of these is taking out what is no longer suitable
Yes.
and
Yeah.
replacing with something for the future, and that's understood. But I think that the overarching thought has to be, how do we preserve our island? And
Right.
the key number in that is what is
Sure.
our
Yeah,
status?
and we'll-
And what is the capacity that we're willing to tolerate?
Sure.
And I
And-
think that comes from our community.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully have a good amount of time to spend on that today, too.
Further comments on this particular slide. I picked on office, now I'm seeing industrial. I'm not interested in smokestacks.
Yeah, that's not a great icon.
On this island.
That's not a great icon. Yeah.
That doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense whatsoever, and I'm not quite sure how you define industrial. We have some light industrial in a few areas, but very light, and so I think we need to clean that up and kind of revisit whether we really look to a demand of that amount in the next 20 years.
Yeah, it would be light industrial, and that's a poor icon. So we'll definitely take your comments in mind. It's smart.
No smokestacks.
No smokestacks.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
I got that part. Any other questions, comments on this? Hearing none, let's jump into the Mid-Island Tract if we could. Again, these two segments are hand in glove. One feeds into the other. As Andrew had suggested, we couldn't help ourselves but to look at Ashmore and the Mid-Island Tract as one large piece of town-owned open space that happens to have a parkway that goes through it. So as we think about these pieces of ground as wholly or largely open space or park space, we can't get away from the concept of creating a parkway through the park. To David's comment about a setback from the parkway, could not agree with that comment more. As we drive past the Ashmore Tract, as we have for years, I've always been enthralled by just having that quality of open space along the parkway. But it's a great opportunity for us to have a central park for the island that is, dare I say, interrupts the parkway, not the other way around. So we've looked at the Mid-Island Tract from a natural system standpoint. These are simply summary slides. We've got open water. We've got a stream corridor that has been channelized by the golf course usage that was there before. We've got strips of plant material and open fairways that are now going fallow. It's a wonderful piece of property, as you've heard from my lips before. It is also a big piece of property. It's 102.5 acres, so we've got a lot of ground here to deal with. You will see that there is 100-year and 500-year flood elevations, so that starts to inform where enclosed uses can and should happen on the site. Same with Ashmore. We've done a more shallow dive into the conditions there, but we do know that there's standing wetlands, there's 500-year and 100-year flood elevations, there's open channels, there's discharge from the sewer plant outfall conditions, and tree cover. There's overhead utility. There's also sanitary sewer discharge to the east. So though it looks to the casual observer as a woodlot, there's a lot going on underneath those trees. However, an opportunity for us to take advantage of that without being invasive. I spoke to the size of the Mid-Island Tract. Again, Ashmore's 70 acres grossly. Mid-Island's 102 acres. That's a lot of real estate. For sake of comparison, I continue to refer to Forsyth Park in Savannah because it's probably very familiar to all of us. That place has always struck me as being a sizable park because it is. It's an urban park. It's in a neighborhood, and it's 30 acres. Combined real estate, we're 5 to 6 times larger than that. So that's all good news. For the Mid-Island, through our conversations with the community, through various public input meetings and social media and web interaction, and also the directives from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, coupled with our own experiences, which we have brought to bear as well. What makes quality places, town places. We've broken the program down into 3 general categories: civic and cultural, natural, which is more speaking to the passive park, and also recreation, what the Recreation and Parks Master Plan suggests should be in the Mid-Island area. St. James Baptist Church, the town is committed to a relocation of that facility on a 5-acre tract on Union Cemetery Road as part of the Mid-Island tract. We think it's important to have an event lawn. This is in no way meant to compete with the other parks. By the way, we've got a fine park system, and we've been very well served in this community with good park design and operations and maintenance. And we're looking to fill the gaps with things that we may not have offered island-wide. That being an event lawn, a place where we can congregate as a community, the proverbial central park of the town, if you will. Again, it's a big piece of property. We can accommodate all of those uses. The concourse is in the Port Royal neighborhood community. Heretofore, that has been supported by this golf course ground. We think there's a great opportunity for a cafe or a restaurant within the park. I continue to use the Tavern on the Green vernacular, a place where we can be immersed into an open space, a green space, and have a place for respite for families to gather. Opportunity for food trucks to visit. That doesn't mean in the middle of the park and a lot of noise and activity, but there is an opportunity for us to introduce foodstuffs on a transient basis. Pavilions of all type, places for families and groups to gather, to get out of the beating sun, have a sense of place. again, to be immersed in a public open space. Community and cultural gardens. We've heard from the public the notion of a Monet garden, more formal gardens, it's not unimportant, but something that augments the natural park, the more passive park with an arboretum, a low country native plants garden, various levels of botanical gardens, things that have constituencies within our community, things that folks will get excited about, be involved with, and it's something different and unique to the island to round out our cultural offerings. This cultivated landscapes, this doesn't have to all be naturalized. Let's all of this go back to nature. Again, we've got the real estate that we can satisfy a number of programs. Open air market, a place for us to congregate, to show off wares, to sell wares, foodstuffs, any number of activities for any number of constituencies across the island. An observation tower. I continue to go back to the size and the beauty of this place. We've found it incredibly attractive and important to allow people to be above the fray, as it were, to see the expanse of this beautiful environment, literally to be able to see the forest despite the trees, as it were. A sculptural fountain, a place to put a center point, a known place within the center of this open space in this park. Again, I refer to Forsyth Park, which you'll see an image of in here. Multi-use community space, places for our citizens to meet, for receptions, for gatherings, for family reunions, for church groups, for service functions, indoor, outdoor, that spills out into open space and park. Doesn't have to be in one place, it can be in multiple places, but a place for us to congregate. An event garden, this is maybe a subset of the cultivated landscapes. We found it incredibly attractive and important to have places in outdoor settings, especially this outdoor setting on this beautiful island in this beautiful climate, for weddings and ceremonies and small graduations and award ceremonies, even, dare I say, private, semi-private Friday and Saturday night dinner parties in a public place. Think of it as maybe a more sophisticated pavilion space. And then housing. We've heard, you heard from Andrew's lips, the need for us to accommodate housing within the Mid-Island district. We've had folks mention that to us in the public meetings. We've got opportunity, we've got the space certainly to accommodate housing within the Mid-Island Tract. I'll be forthright to suggest that we're not necessarily recommending that at this juncture. We think there's maybe better places than taking up this precious open space for housing. And stay tuned, I've got a diagram for that. And then a pedestrian bridge. If we're in fact looking at Ashmore and the Mid-Island Tract as being one piece of open space, we've got a couple of intersections that we can deal with, one of which is signalized, one of which is not. So one could argue the pedestrian and bicycle connection is a bit stressed in that regard, and this would be a great opportunity to create free flow from one side of the parkway to the other, not just for the open space purposes, but for the neighborhoods that are adjacent to both of those pieces of open space. That can be a highly sculptural element as well that signifies the center of the island, as it were.
Brian, before you move on, event lawn, what is not included as a use on an event lawn?
What is not included?
Yes.
I don't think there'd be any structures. There may be structures adjacent. This isn't some big pavilion. We've got a beautiful community gathering and entertainment space in the Low Country Celebration Park. It would maybe be that open space without the entertainment venues adjacent. Again, a place for 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day celebrations, church groups, art fairs, whatever it is the community may
Not
find.
soccer fields.
Not soccer fields. Now,
Okay.
if two kids go out there and start kicking a soccer ball, we're probably not going to shoo them away, right?
No.
But no, we're not going to have organized sports on that
Okay,
activity.
thank you.
level.
Brian,
Sir?
historical asterisk. Charles Fraser always talked about having a Monet garden on the island. Is that somewhat the same thing as an event garden or a cultural garden?
I think it's more the cultural gardens. And again, David, there's opportunity to have each of those. But the Monet Garden, a formal garden, one could argue it has a limited constituency, but you won't. But many people would be amazed at just how many people are attracted to it, that type of sophisticated landscape.
Monet's talent, at least as he envisioned in his paintings, was very naturalized, but multicolored, and it was in one way quintessential Hilton Head. So I just add that.
As they say, a relaxed formality, but I get it. It's that type of intentional garden space of any number of ilk. Stay tuned, we'll develop that further as we go. But it is something in deference to naturalizing the entire tract.
Brian, if I may, what's your creative idea about creating connectivity with the Ashmore tract if we can't use it? Maybe we can use it in some passive ways. Is that where you're going?
Yes, I think that's right, Bill. I come to understand that development of the Ashmore tract for anything outside of a park's usage is restricted, and that's the full and complete extent of my knowledge of those restrictions. I think the environment of the place is probably more restricted than anything. So whatever we do there, we have to touch lightly. In my vision, and we'll explore that in a moment, I think there's a great opportunity to intentionally introduce people to that tract carefully, sensitively, and allow for us to use that piece of property. Using that piece of property means to circulate through it with a soft surface trail system, something that is not invasive, does not damage or destroy the environment, but allows us to be engaged with that environment. To start cutting down trees and placing structures, that's a horse of a different color.
If I can just ask the same question on what, for me, would be wonderful to have in this park. Which of these areas would you imagine something on a smaller scale where you could have performances, Shakespeare in the Park, places for readings, quiet places to sit and contemplate? Which of the ones that have already been defined would you imagine, or is that something really separate that should be on the list?
Well, we've got a small performance space identified for a portion of what you just said.
An outdoor?
Yeah. Again, nothing to compete with the performance space that we have.
Nothing on that scale at all?
But something
much-
that is, dare I say, the size of this room, where you could have a small wedding
Yes.
ceremony, or you could have poetry readings, or someone playing acoustic, or a harp recital, whatever it may be, something that's small and intimate, but it's embedded in a park setting. It's
A
not
quiet,
out.
reserved place just for
Quiet,
that?
reserved, away from the madding crowd, as it were. But there's a number of opportunities that we can sprinkle about. It doesn't have to be go there or go there. It could be a choice of places. Again, we've got the luxury of,
Should that be formally added to the list?
yes, it really is, Tammy. You're right. It's under those cultivated landscapes category. Our program is as long as my arm, and for sake of brevity, we've grouped some things together. And you'll see a place for that very function upcoming. On the natural side of things, again, we've got the beauty of the ponds. The ponds need some work because they were put in place for irrigation source water. They need to be interconnected and naturally flushed so that they don't have green stuff growing in them. We think there's limited wetlands on the site. There's tree cover. There's beautiful plant flora and fauna that we can preserve, conserve, and enhance any number of trails, types of surfaces, hard surface, soft surfaces. We've heard from the public the desire for a cross-country trail that would circumnavigate the park. That is something that can fit in, and we won't even know it's there unless I point to it. So we can satisfy that as well without damaging the habitat. What we have there, what Mother Nature has delivered us, and what the golf course has left to go fallow, we can restore and further enhance. As I said, we've got these ponds on site. I think we've got a great opportunity to better manage the freshwater of recharging the aquifer, naturally flushing the ponds, interconnecting some of those ponds possibly so they're less like big puddles and more like legitimate lagoons and lakes, and take advantage of our real estate to the extent we can manage stormwater runoff. So we're keeping it on the site, not running it off into the marshes. An ecology center. We've got, again, an opportunity for another gathering place, educational place, to showcase all the ecological aspects of what would be the natural part of this tract or park. Again, I've had experience with the Audubon Society for years, and that organization does wonderful things on the educational side of things and showcasing flora and fauna and sustainability and resiliency practices. And the younger we can get that message planted in our young brains, the more successful we'll be as a society, I think. Observation decks. Let's take advantages of those wetlands and those meadows and the open water and boardwalks across them, and let's interconnect them. Nobody does boardwalks as well as Hilton Head Island. Canopy walks. Again, it's the forest and the trees thing. You'll see examples of literally taking elevated walks through the canopy of trees to better educate what those canopies are all about. On the recreation side of things, again, this came from not only the public, but from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Staff has done an absolutely wonderful job at adjudicating our recreational needs in the Mid-Island and finding a home for all of the various recreation activities that the community demands. So what we're proposing in this park is a multi-use recreation lawn. And Glenn, this is a place where you may have kids kicking a soccer ball or taking their ball gloves out or a Frisbee. There is not to be, my understanding at this juncture, no organized sports leagues playing there, but a place for a neighborhood group of kids to congregate and have flat, drainable, open space where they can run and chase a dog and do whatever kids and adults want to do. Playground and nature play area. Again, we've got a central space we'll discuss in a moment that is people-centric. This is a great place for families to bring young kids to a nature playground, something that is unique to the Mid-Island tract, something that is unique to Hilton Head, not pieces of play equipment out of a catalog, not that there's anything wrong with that, but a unique type of play experience, and also an interactive water fountain. We've had great success on this island of those interactive spray pads. Again, multi-use trails of every ilk about the perimeter, connecting the in-tract pieces of various surfaces, extension of the Greater Island Parkway, Greenway, and trail system. How can everybody get to every place on a bicycle or on foot? That is an ongoing challenge for a town like Hilton Head, but we're world-class at it. We're known around the country for the great trail system and green spaces that we have. So all of that program in those three buckets, as I suggest, start to geographically arrange themselves grossly this way. The cultural and civic aspects of the event lawn and a cafe and gardens, we've placed more towards the, dare I say, the front of the park, closer to the parkway, yet it's still far enough removed from the parkway that automobile traffic is not invasive to those uses. This is a big piece of property, and I keep causing my eye to go to the airport strip that is upper left of this image just to bring scale back into my mindset. You can squint your eye and see that the majority of the park is naturalized, nature park. Even some of the cultural activities are gardens, so those could just as easily be shaded green and not orange. And recreation is rather modest by comparison. Keep in mind, though, all the recreational demands of the island are being accommodated in all of our other parks, so nothing is being left out, he says as he looks at Jennifer. So now to take that gross diagram and get down into a little finer grain of detail. I'm sorry I'm still dealing with diagrams and bubbles. Next time we get together, we'll be looking at site plans, should you allow me to do so. But again, every fine community needs a central green space. I think this is it. Every fine central green space needs a center to it. I think that's it. This is the heart of the heart, if you will. It's far enough away from the parkway that it is not invaded by the parkway, but it's in great proximity and views from intersections and from the center point of the parkway. Again, you can see Ashmore poking its head up on the bottom of this image, parkway through the park once again. We're always looking to provide necessary vehicle access, but from the immediate perimeter, and get people into parking lots, out of their cars, and into the park as quickly as possible, and not routing pavement and parking lots through the park. So that center location is geographically and elevationally there because it's above the 500-year and it's on dry ground and it's nestled, if you will, among some irrigation ponds. This is that center core, the event lawn, if you will, of the park. What's its shape may very well be that, but that's the geographic location. You can see that there's vehicular access off of Dillon, but a place for people to congregate for pop-up events, structured events, a place for observation tower. We're doing one such in that actually is the image in Greenville, just up the road 4 hours, for the very same opportunity, and that is to get folks above the fray, observing the more massive landscape and having a different vantage point, physical vantage point than they would walking on terra firma.
Brian, are you envisioning a scale that's roughly the same as the
I don't
Celebration Park
think.
lawn, or is it bigger? What's the scale of that?
I think it's probably about the same size, maybe a little bit bigger. I wouldn't see it any smaller, David. And also understand, this isn't just all mown lawn. We're not looking to remove trees. We may limb trees up, we may remove some understory, but to have, I think of this as the academic campus quadrangle feel of a place. It's that center of your campus. Pick your alma mater and think about that center, more sacred space, but it's where everybody goes to congregate, to people watch, to enjoy activities. This very tower, where I thought you were going with that question, I don't envision this tower being quite as big as the one as we photograph here, but it's the notion of getting above the tree canopy, or at least into the tree canopy, viewing to the north into the natural area of the park, viewing to the south and to the west into maybe the more structured portion of the park. Absolutely dramatic views. Establishing that center with a structural fountain. Again, this is a photograph of one that many of us are familiar with at Forsyth Park, that is in clear view from the parkway, but some white noise for sure, and also far enough away that the parkway is not interfering. Tammy, this is to your point, I think, with the topography that we're dealing with. We've got a great, which isn't much, by the way, but we have some topography. We've got an opportunity to nestle a small, very intimate, dare I say, amphitheater into grade in a very natural setting
These pictures are much better, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. And that could be, a great place just for people to walk in with their Starbucks and read the newspaper, to the extent that we can read newspapers anymore. And the cafe and multi-purpose space. This is a legitimate restaurant. This is Tavern on the Green. This is immersion in the park to have proximity to events on the lawn, to children playing, close proximity to your parked automobile, but a place for foodstuffs indoors and outdoors. The kitchen space and utility can be used for the community space as well, where we can do food prep for community events. This is also a revenue opportunity for the town, where our experiences are where we've got private operators that come into these and share that revenue, so that defers some maintenance costs for the park as a whole. So that's the establishment of the center. Again, we touched upon the Native Islanders, and we've had meetings with them and have heard, not the last meeting with them, we've heard some of their thoughts and our desires to showcase our history and our culture. We've got the historic cemetery that we need to respect along Union Cemetery Road. We've got the relocation of St. James Church from its present location north of the airport on a 5-acre tract. This is a site plan, lower left, that the church leadership has had produced. We're looking to take that and modify it such that it fits into the park and the park fits into it. So it's not an out parcel of our open space, but it's integral to our open space. So again, access directly off of Union Cemetery for both the church and also that portion of the open space to park automobiles. Again, great place for a small, maybe not so small, a community gathering place. Heretofore, I think the historic neighborhoods have depended upon the religious organizations for their meeting space and their congregating space, for funerals and weddings and graduations and the like, as we have heard. I think this is a great opportunity to work with the church campus with this public ground and satisfy some of those needs and maybe take some of the burden off the church group, and also have that intermingling of both congregation and park users when it's convenient to all. And to speak to the culture of this place on the island, not just the historic neighborhoods all over the island, but specifically to this Mitchellville, as I think of a district of the island. And this is an opportunity for open air market. Certainly this can help to satisfy some of the wares of the Gullah community. We've got other great cultural and historic facilities across the island. This is not meant to take the place of any one of those, but this is meant to augment it. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all place around the island. We can have multiple places that celebrate our history and our culture. And a cultural gardens, not a museum piece, but a place where we can physically grow food, should we so choose, physically have open air markets for the entire community. But we think in this quiet area of the park would be a great opportunity. To the natural system of the park, again, the further to the north and the east, the wetter the ground goes. To David's point, we've had 2 500-year events in recent years, so that whole metric is upside down given climate change and sea level rise. The stream that used to be through here has been relegated to more of a ditch. We think there's an opportunity to restore that to a legitimate, fully functioning stream, bring access in off of Union Cemetery, and gain access to what is a large piece of geography for preservation, regeneration of the flora and fauna, conserve the aquatic habitats and enhance them. Again, I mentioned of tying some of those together, expanding our stormwater capacity, introduction of an ecology center, indoor, outdoor meeting and educational opportunities. Canopy Walk, again, another place to engage the beautiful environment. Any number of overlooks on water or wetlands, all of which comes back to roost to home plate. Everything is interconnected with the heart of the tract. Not interfered with by the heart of the tract, but interconnected. So I and my family can walk, bike, drive, park, and we can walk and circumnavigate any number of uses within the park. To get into that center space, though, access off of Dillon, automobile parking, interactive fountain, nature play, bocce and lawn bowling, small family-type games, and then the open play is in what is largely open ground for fairway clearing in golf course uses. But keep that towards the Dillon Road side of things. Again, you'll recall some of the diagrams Andrew showed. We've got noise impact from the airport that begins to creep into our park. We're putting these activity areas toward that west side and keeping the more quiet side of the park for the natural park system. Park Promenade, the cultivated landscapes and the gardens, again, Monet Garden, any number of garden spaces, but the gardens and the center space is our signature. If we do our jobs right, we won't need signage to tell people this is Hilton Head's Central Park, whatever we ultimately name it. It will be obvious to all as they drive through the park, this is someplace pretty special. So perimeter access, perimeter parking, get people out of their automobiles and get them into these uses. We've got perimeter trails. We need to connect to those. We need to have a whole series of trails and systems through the park, interconnecting through the site, connecting the park and other areas, boardwalks, promenades, nature trails, informal paths. How we get people across the road, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the Dillon Road signalized intersection. That needs to be enhanced. We need to have safer pedestrian crossing. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to change the very character of the parkway as it goes through the park with realignments of the roadway system, certainly landscape treatment that is different. Maybe no landscape treatment, and the park is the landscape treatment, but the point being between the endpoints to do something special. As I mentioned before, housing has been raised as an opportunity for this site. As the environmental conditions are pulled out and as the airport impacts are plotted, there are very few opportunities, dare I say, for this level of development. Union Cemetery is one on the north and also on the south. It is our recommendation, given what we found in the district as a whole, that we do not use this open space for housing. We've got other opportunities within the district for housing, and I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the island to build a very, very special world-class park. That interconnectedness, as I mentioned before, can we put a pedestrian bridge of any number of qualities across the parkway? Certainly we can. Is that can be an additive aspect. The park design wouldn't depend upon that happening. And now to Ashmore. With again, we think we can introduce folks and to get out of their automobiles and maybe have a pavilion within Ashmore working around the trees and the wetlands. Disc golf has been another recreation program that we've been asked to accommodate. We didn't think it was appropriate on the mid-island because of the plethora of folks, and we didn't want that to be a conflict. But we think we can route a disc golf course through the trees and avoid the wetlands and still have that level of play on a piece of ground that is largely left as it is today. And then also routing any number of trails through the park, connecting to Matthews Drive. The purple box to the upper left is a potential for redevelopment of the Port Royal Plaza. If that would be a more walkable mix of use, people-intensive development, what a great way of introducing folks to the Mid-Island Tract and to the Ashmore, and vice versa. And there's also that opportunity to bring a driveway in at Union Cemetery and turn that into a four-way intersection. It may or may not be signalized. That's an engineering issue, but would give us an opportunity to, if it were signalized, to have full crosswalks and allow people to cross very easily. So the combined pieces of real estate, 170-some acres of ground, look like this, with some limited parking, largely green, largely naturalized, but a real legitimate sense of place, a new Central Park for the town. I'll come back to this in a minute, and then I'll ask y'all for some questions. Our steps are to continue to have briefings with constituency, not the least of which in importance is you all. Next time we get together, should we get your head nod today, is to take these bubbles and get down to actual site plans for the park. I'm chomping at the bit to get down to the park, just exactly what it all looks like. Where are roads, where are parking lots, where are facilities, what does it look like three-dimensionally? Look at the architectural components of cafe, multi-use space, eco center. What's the architectural character to Tammy's earlier point? That's where we're going to start looking at materials and vocabulary. And then, not the least, how much does this cost? What's the capital expense and what's the operations and maintenance impacts of all of that? So stay tuned for our next meetings. All that being said, I apologize for going on. I could talk about this for 2 days, as you well know, but I'd love to hear your questions and comments.
David? Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in since it was quite.
Sure.
Okay. I was just going to say thank you for a great presentation. I think this is such an exciting project of creating Hilton Head's own Central Park concept, and I'm glad you're here.
David?
Brian, I have tremendous professional respect for you and your team. You maximize the community benefits of this endeavor. You understand the process, the programming, and so on. I think that the question comes to my mind, and I'll explain why it comes to my mind, is who decides on the program? And what program does maximize not only the short-term perceived benefits of a project, but also the long-term benefits to the community, the quality of life, the economic prosperity, and so on. My background is in architectural design, community planning. And so when I think of a program for a project of this size, I think of a family wanting to have their house designed by an architect. They go to that architect and they say, I'd like 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and I'd like the dining room to be connected, and so on and so forth, to maximize their quality of life and what they perceive to be the benefit to the community, to themselves. And that, in a sense, that's what we're doing today. And your list is extensive. And I don't know how many of those things are actually going to be incorporated in the plan. But I think I think people have heard me say before that I think that in 50 years, what will distinguish Hilton Head Island as a community is the open space, the quality of open space that it chooses to preserve, and the quality of human gathering places it creates. So in a sense, what we've been talking about today are those two things. So I am sort of philosophically and emotionally connected to what we're trying to accomplish. But you also know that I have been pleading for this community to address, confront the immense crisis of affordable housing and the needs of our employees on the island. So when I see 103 acres of property owned by this community with very few restrictions, I ask the question, isn't there a place to satisfy employee housing for this community? I ask the question, what other piece of 20 acres does the town own that it has the flexibility and the capability and interest in developing as employee housing? I'm not sure there's a good answer for that. So I think the program that we as council are challenged to approve should reflect on what our long-term community needs are, as well as the near term. I don't know how to emphasize any stronger than to say that 103 acres on this piece of ground should incorporate affordable housing in one way or another. The quality of environment for the individuals who would live in that space would be incredible. It would be a commitment and show respect to our employees. So I don't know where that might land in this area, but the Legends is up near Union Cemetery Road. There was an area that you designated perhaps for recreation on Dillon Road. It seems to me that acknowledging the crisis that we have to provide employee housing on this island should be an integral part of the solution for this piece of property. So I have a hard time saying this plan is complete at this point. Thank you.
Bill?
Brian and team, thank you very much. I think your work, if we move in this direction, certainly will celebrate nature, which is very important to us. I think it provides an opportunity for education in this community for people of all ages, and also for people that visit here in terms of the importance of nature, the variety of nature, and the sustainability of nature. I think that's very important. It also offers the opportunity to commemorate in a participative way the heritage of this community. I think, to David's point, there's no question that affordable housing is an issue. But I asked the question, land near the post office, drive by that every day, probably a 10, 12 acre tract. We're not doing anything with that. What could we do to encourage that? If we look at disc golf, is it disc golf or disc?
With
The catch. Yeah. You can see I have.
Similar shape.
Played it. But if we avail ourselves of the Ashmore Tract in a creative, sensitive way, and I, for one, would want my friend Tom Peoples to come after me. So I think if we did that, we could knock on the door of the Boys and Girls Club and land that we had there and maybe do a swap, maybe. And then that vacated land could be used for affordable housing, perhaps. I heard today that along Marshland Road, there could be opportunity. We know, as Glenn has mentioned, a lot of our existing office space is not working. It's empty. And I agree to what, Brian, you were alluding to. The old empty office space is not the model the new young professional is looking for. And I think you hinted we might be able to do something here in this surrounding community to do something like that. As owners come to the reality that the asset that they have is a non-performing asset, it's an asset that's not appreciating, maybe we come in and help create opportunities for repurposing, and affordable housing could be another example. And I also heard you say that there's a high degree of sensitivity to start intruding on this space with housing, given the natural features of this land. So I don't want to diminish the importance my colleague here is placing on affordable housing. I don't think this is the spot.
Thank you. Alex?
Thanks, Brian. I guess my first question, if you could kind of sum up on a percentage basis, how much of this, I guess, conceptual programming on these sites was driven by the public engagement process and by your professional expertise? Can you kind of balance that for me?
I can estimate those
Sure.
percentages, Alex. I would say that the recreation aspects were dictated by the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I already mentioned that we adjudicated between pieces of ground to make sure we satisfied that need, scratched that itch, as it were. I will say the vast majority of what we have shown here programmatically came from the public.
Yeah.
They want a real place. They want Central Park space. They want to have a variety of things that maybe don't exist, or maybe not the right spot relative to the park program. We have used our own experiences. I think that's maybe one of the reasons you have us here today, is based on that experience of what makes a fully functioning park for a wide variety of communities and demographics, as it were. So some of the things that we've added in there that we know are successful in energizing parks is what we've added. Observation tower being one of them. Crazy as it may seem, everybody goes to the observation tower. Summit Park is an example. Everybody meets at the observation tower. Nature play, having a place for kids to play in something that looks vastly different than any other place that parents take their kids. That's what we've brought to the table. We've had experience in restaurants, the proverbial tavern on the green, to energize that place all the time. The more people, without destroying the environment, the more people we can get engaged in a number of activities within the park, 24/7, 365, the better. In February, evidence this day, probably wouldn't have many people out there wandering through the Manet Garden, but you probably have some people going to the restaurant for lunch or for dinner. So, and they're getting there maybe by foot, maybe by automobile. So we've added some spice to the stew, as it were. I would, back to a long answer to a short question, I would say that 90% of that program has been suggested to us by the public.
Okay, all right. The reason I asked that question, we want to always have our ear to the ground when it comes to our community, right? And based on what Brian and his team are presenting to us, it seems as if the community is really leaning towards this ground being more passive than anything else, okay? And I think that's important that we recognize that. I'm going to push a little bit, Brian, on the 20% as far as your expertise is concerned, okay? There's some items that will probably fall off here, okay? And I get that. And Councilman Ames has already alluded to the need for housing. Councilman Harkins has said we need it also. I'm sure if we go around this table, everybody's going to agree that we need housing on Hilton Head. And we've somewhat made a decision that this is not the right spot. Okay. But I think it's also important, Brian, that as you message to us and to the community, that it's always going to be a give and take here. All right. So if it's not here, then where? All right. And I think that we are creating such a tremendous opportunity, a where. Okay. I mean, this will be a place to go on Hilton Head. And while I can appreciate us searching for ground elsewhere that the town owns, i.e. near the post office, which I support, but there's not a where like this at the north end of the island near the post office, and it is here, okay? So it could not only enhance the quality of life for those that are already there, but it could enhance the quality of life for those that we most desperately need here, the working folks. So as we present, I think it's more so, let's use pickleball for an example. But we want to say no to pickleball here, correct? But we will say yes to pickleball somewhere else. And we're going to support that in a capital investment way. And I think that when it comes to the other items that may fall off, which are needs of the community, we have to support the private-public partnerships to get them done in this area, okay? Because there's opportunity to do that. And I think we need to be very loud and clear that we are going to do that. Because no need in building a tremendous where and not let the peripherals really enhance themselves around, particularly when it comes to our community needs. So I think, again, I'm going back to messaging. I think it's important that we are raising our hands saying, hey, we're going to do such and such in this area along with the park. To me, the park is easy. It really is. We've already got a master plan. Now it's finding some money, figure out what's going to go there. A few years is there. But the real community needs around the park is what, in my mind, that's the hard part. That's the part that we have to be intentional and we have to be courageous about doing. So far, you know, I'm accepting what's in front of us, but I'm going to challenge that expertise in telling us, hey guys, don't forget, you need to do such and such also, right? So those are my comments.
Tammy?
Appreciate that, Alex.
I'm just adding to what I said before. I appreciate, and I think that you've demonstrated to all of us that your expertise is exactly what we need here on Hilton Head as we think through a number of different issues. Right now, we're focused on this parcel. And through the community engagement and percentage that I see documented here, we are providing what the residents of Hilton Head have been looking for. And you've will further put it together in an exceptional way that will make us a world-class community. And this will highlight that. And I appreciate it. So I like what I see. I think that we have more to come that will also be exciting and enriching for our community through the educational opportunities and the experiences that each individual human will have on that parkland. And thank you.
Thomas?
Brian and Andrew, it works. It really works. I think you've done what we would have expected you to do vis-a-vis engaging the public, engaging the right stakeholders, being very sensitive and cognizant of the comp and strategic plans, and incorporating the Parks and Rec master plan. I mean, all of the elements that we would have expected in this are reflected by what you've done. You know, the town has some history in tackling big projects. If you think of Shelter Cove 12 years ago, Parks and Rec Center, Celebration Park, and the town has done a good job in those developments and redevelopments. And if you look what happens around that area of redevelopment, it's what we want to happen in the district with this tract. And I have no reason to believe it won't happen. David, I'm sensitive to workforce housing. The bigger issue is workforce development, of which housing is one of many elements. And I don't think this is the spot for introducing housing. I think we do have other spots. Alex, the North End Post Office site might be the right spot. More work has to be done. But I have confidence in your company, Brian. I have confidence in the town's ability to build and develop a big project, and I have confidence in what happens after the project is built.
Lynn?
Thank you. Brian and team, thank you for a spectacular presentation and a thorough analysis of what we can do with this land and what we want to do with this land. I believe you have listened to the community here, and I appreciate that. You've come up with a lot of features going into this. Sure, some of them are going to fall away, but it looks like a long laundry list, even though it is 100+ acres. But we will understand that as we move into actual design elements. I have great respect for my friend David, but I respectfully disagree. I do not believe that this is the site for workforce housing. I am prepared to make a parallel commitment to what we spend on this. We'll also spend an appropriate share towards workforce housing. It is that important. This is vital and important, but workforce housing is also vital and important. I'm excited about the cultural aspects that you are overlaying into this. I understand and frankly love the cultural, the value that we put on our culture here in this community. We have an island image. We want to enhance that island image. And it's a poor way to put it, but this could be the cherry on the sundae. This could really carry it a long, long way. I have some background in the law, and I have some experience in dealing with restrictions. And I want us to thoroughly understand the restrictions that apply to what we're calling the Mid-Island Tract. I've had some discussions in the past with Port Royal about this. I am led to believe that the land, the Mid-Island Tract, is significantly restricted from development, but not totally restricted from development. I want to understand what that is and understand how the features that you're talking about putting into this fall within those limitations. Again, I have not reviewed it in detail, but my impression is that Ashmore Tract is severely restricted. It was acquired to be maintained as open space. And so I want to understand and accept how these developments that you're talking about doing on the Ashmore Tract would be acceptable. Sure, it would be wonderful if we had a 175-acre tract, but I'm wondering whether we can do that much with it. Is it wishful thinking to do those things? So I look forward to moving this forward. I need the guidance from the experts, I'm just an old lawyer, and I don't know what I'm talking about, and so I want to listen to what you folks have to say and how you guide us on this. And then finally, I have a suggestion from Mark. Let's start keeping a photographic gallery of the developments that are going on there. Let's go out and get a picture of it now, photographic picture of it now, and have someone engaged to carry it forward as we're moving it forward. I look forward to the opportunity, and I thank you for your hard work. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Well, Brian, you know, having dinner with you and the team last night, I'm very appreciative of what you do for us. We have to move on whether we're going to put housing there or not. I'm going to ask Mark to put that discussion on our housing workshop next couple of weeks, so we come out of there with a clear decision that council wants to make. Council wants to go forward, it's fine. Council's against it, it ends right there.
Now, let me be clear, Mayor. My stance on this track has more to do with solving the workforce housing problem in some way. And if it's some other track that the town can make an equal commitment
Right.
to, that's fine.
I know you do.
I agree with your suggestion that it be part of the PPC,
Good.
or the workforce housing.
Thank you. Whatever the answer is, the answer will be for the council. Is that okay? Okay, Brian, where do you want to go next?
Can we take just a minute, or may I take just a
Well,
minute?
we all take a minute, Dave, so let's all run, yeah. Yeah, we'll take 10, okay? The staff has been going back and forth. Brian, what's next?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to turn this over to Kyle May, and Andrew will add some color commentary, I'm sure, on this island-wide conditions and trends assessment. And this is the first step in what is moving towards a larger vision of the island, but it'll tackle a lot of the issues that we've talked about here heretofore. Kyle, the floor is yours.
Brian. Good morning, council, mayor, everyone. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate that. Really great to be back on the island again and be with you all again to continue this conversation. Brian and Mark, in your earlier comments, mentioned this study that we're embarking on here over the next several months to try to understand, and take a snapshot of where we are as a community right now based across a wide range of metrics, trying to accumulate data, connect that data, make sense of that data, and determine what it means for our quality of life, our quality of place. Mark, you used the term which I really appreciated, which was a community appraisal, right? That leads to some kind of sense of what equilibrium looks like here. Understanding that you as a community and as an island, even though you are an island, don't exist in a vacuum, right? You're affected by a number of internal and external trends, some of which you can have a little control or influence over, some of which are just going to impact you, and we got to figure out the right ways to use that energy for good or to mitigate the challenges that become with it. In this process, what we're really trying to do is not come up necessarily with solutions, and I'll get to this a little bit more here in a second, or really recommendations how to this work. This is just about knowing who we are right now, where we stand, where we may be based on some of these trends in the future, and start to look toward thoughts on what we ought to be doing, what we ought to be prioritizing. As we have conversations like these around a table with the community at large, what are the real data points that measure who we are right now, bringing data into this conversation. So I'm really excited to be here. I've worked on a number of communities around the country, and there's one common denominator around communities that ask these type of questions. They're great places to live, and they have people that really care about their quality of life and their quality of place because they think proactively, about addressing these things. So, we're excited, I think, to be part of this conversation. And if there's one theme I could, jump into this, and I think part of the earlier conversation riffs on this is that, one of the important reasons to have this discussion now and understand who you are is that a lot of the easy stuff is over with. A lot of the easy decisions, have been made in terms of growth, in terms of development, in terms of investment. We're entering a new chapter here, as an island, as a community, set of communities on the island, and it comes with some harder questions, right? It comes with some more thoughtful conversations that are necessary as part of that. And we're eager, I think, in this process to, at minimum, infuse some real data into that discussion that can help drive that forward. I wanted to quickly run through an agenda here, just give a sense of what we mean by what we're doing here with this conditions and trends assessment. It sounds very planner, like a planner word, but we'll break it down a little bit. Wanted to talk a little bit about the process we want to walk through. So exactly how are we going to get to point A to point B? I want to let you know that you're not alone out here in doing this type of work. As I mentioned, great communities do it, but there's actually some communities quite like yours that have done some precedent studies that I think we can pull some best practices from. Want to share those with you, also give you some highlights. I do want to talk about some topics today. Think about these as big, leaky buckets that contain a bunch of different subtopics that we're going to explore and try to understand better, and most importantly, try to connect. And let's get started, I think, very, very quickly, very minor way, by asking a big question, but I think a pretty fundamental one to why we're here. How many people live on this island? Okay? How many people live here? We'll talk about some next steps as well. We get started in terms of a purpose statement, and Council, I know you've seen this before, public just introducing why we're actually up to this. We really want to understand the position of where we are, and I've made some of these points already. To consider the future of the island, again, based on the community, based on leadership, and on the conclusions that we're drawing from a robust analysis. So this is not to ignore the cultural side of this conversation, the intuition of the folks that live here, but rather it's to bolster that conversation with the real world data that we're going to discover. We want to build, engage, and serve. So as we build, this is about trying to pull a lot of stuff together. You've done a lot of great planning. There's a lot of great data sets. You've completed a comprehensive plan that has an incredible look, scan about who you are. You've done other neighborhood plans topical plans. This is about pulling those pieces together, identifying where there's some gaps in understanding or some gaps in coverage, digging deeper on those. We do want to engage. We want to have meetings like this with you, I think with the public, with some key stakeholders, get that qualitative side of the information and understand how we can communicate these issues better. And lastly, in terms of serving, we want this to serve as an initial step, as a foundational piece for forthcoming work, right? Whether it's a master plan, whether it's more specific neighborhood plans, whether it's a future park consideration, having this data and this process as a snapshot and getting started. So why do you do this right now? It's been a couple of crazy years. I think we all know. We've had some conversation here about office space that is affected by the last 2 years. We've had conversations here about tourism that was profoundly disrupted in this last 2 years that we've experienced. I just took off my mask. A lot is going on in the world and in our region that has affected the way we think about our places, our communities. It's revealed a lot of things that festered and we didn't quite see, but now we see quite clearly, like the tide going down. And it's put a spotlight on some issues that we think we can address, with proactive planning. So it's not that you're alone in coming to some of these realizations quickly, but in trying to figure out what you can do about it, you are in a small club. Your region, now I say region because we want to understand, it's not just us in this island, it's our larger body, is growing and changing rapidly. You all know that. You all go across the bridge. Whether it's in Bluffton or in the larger county or indeed around the larger set of counties, this is a fast-growing region. It affects everything. Seeing the ships out in the water, lining up to get into the port, that affects things. All these things are connected, and we want to start to draw those. Access is changing here. We have plans from SCDOT. We have plans and really impacts from our airport that are affecting the way people can get onto the island, access the island, invest into the island. Federal and state spending, as Mark goes through the process of dealing with, these programs that are emerging almost daily from the federal and state sources, trying to understand the best way we can spend and invest in our communities catalytically. That takes data. That takes understanding, part of this process. New residents, new perspectives, but that should really read residents, new perspectives. Residents evolve and grow. Communities evolve and grow. We've been in a number of great meetings that have exposed issues that differ from the northern part of the island to the southern part of the island. 34 square miles is not a monolithic place. There's a lot of different opinions in this part of this point. And lastly, but I think most importantly, this is a real moment in time for this island. I talk about this being next chapter, same book, right? As you grow up and continue to mature, there really are some big decisions that are pending, that are out there. And we think this process can serve as a good first step in making those decisions well-informed and indeed long-lasting and important. I want to stress here, I'll go through these quickly, this is not a reset. This is not a redo of the comprehensive plan or work you've done previously. In fact, it's a further elaboration of that work. With the comp plan, you scan, right? You scan about 1 inch and 1 mile. What we get to do with this work is where you've revealed something within that inch, we get to dig in really deep and start to understand what that trend really means, how it's connected to other things, review those other plans and zoom in. It's attempt, again, to connect the dots. I use this word maybe too much or phrase. It's the getting to the so what of the data, right? An opinion about what that data really means to us and where we ought to make policy. We can do 4 things here: build a baseline, think about acceptable levels of service, critical data information. I just want to highlight one point on this slide, which is that idea of building a culture of data-informed decision-making. This is not a criticism whatsoever. We work in, dozens of communities around the country where notions and emotions lead, right? And data follow. And I think through this process, what we really want to do, again, as I keep making this point, build a culture around the numbers leading a conversation, and that together we build informed decisions together. And then lastly, not least, consider and reveal communities' capacity. We think this follows as a final part to this conversation. Once we have the data and we understand how we're growing, how we're changing, what does that look like? How does that play out? What's the right scenario for us to grow into over 10 years or 20 years? Tammy, you brought up the great idea about the numbers here, right? The thing about the numbers with those forecasts is those are opportunities. We get to shape what that looks like. It doesn't even mean we have to accept all of it either, right? So through this process, we really get in item 4 here a chance to define what capacity really looks like on this island. Talking about the process, we want to move pretty quickly, and I think we have an opportunity to do that because there's so much baseline work. And Jennifer and the full team in the side here have done a number of studies that we're going to fold right into this. We want to discover as much as we can, catalog as much as we can, try to make some connections. Key thing in item 2, though, is just to see where there's some gaps in coverage. Things we've not quite taken a strong look at that we can zoom in on more, areas where there's not as tight a connection as we could draw, or maybe some things that just flat are emergent over the last 2 years. One thing that's come out since we finished the last comp plan, the census is done, right? We actually have hard numbers, hard counts that we can apply to some of this and really know some real data along that line. So a place to augment. Strategic analysis, again, digging in deep, I've mentioned this. And last but not least, sharing and integration. We want to make some presentations to you all along the way to share some nuggets of stuff we just find really interesting. You need to know this, right? And find some ways to make that compelling, but also make it clear what's really important to you moving forward, and also ultimately integrate this with some future work and what I start to call the point of view work. You know who you are, but what are you going to do about that moving forward? These are just some key messages. I think invariably all of you are going to be asked, well, what are we doing with this? And I'd love to be able to help you inform, that conversation. I've said a lot of these words already. One thing that I would reiterate, with a process like this, you get to identify some trends. It doesn't mean they're just going to become your destiny. You can reinforce some of those things you like that are happening and actually augment them. All can also address some challenges that are out there, mitigate those impacts. What this is not, sometimes that's a more important to the question, answer to the question. This is not a redo of the past work, right? This is a greater articulation. This is a deeper dig, I should say, into some of those issues. And in some ways, it's not an unprecedented or exercise either. I'm going to show you some examples here. Great communities do this work, and they do it regularly. And it's not just data for data's sake. I mentioned the so what of this, trying to connect the dots. And lastly, an important so what, what is this not? It's not necessarily just bounded by what you can do in this room. Meaning it's not just thinking about capital improvement investments. It's not just thinking about the purview of the town. It's thinking about broader issues, again, that affect residents, visitors, quality of life, quality of place, quality of opportunity, those 3 critical cues. I mentioned you're not alone in the wilderness, although the first example here is pretty much in the middle of it. There are a few perfect analogs for what you're trying to do. And you ought to feel good about that because it means you're doing something novel and something that's important and something that someone else is going to study at some point, right? But there are some communities out there that have thought about this, and I think you'll see a kind of common thread among them. There are places that have this shrink-swell dynamic, right? There are places that experience tourism. There are places that are also kind of locked into their geography for various reasons, whether it's mountains or it's water or it's some other consideration. There's many more than just the 4 that are on this list, and we'll circulate with you, Ann, some of the examples that we've found. But from Breckenridge to Nantucket, there's a number of aspects that we've picked out as best ofs that we really like about the studies that they've done. Picking out, and specifically Nantucket, Massachusetts, which you all know is an island. They don't have a bridge, but an island. They really wanted to focus on the housing questions in this and what residential growth would look like. And think about some scenarios, but also think about the rules they had today in terms of entitlements, in terms of zoning, in terms of pipeline, just to see what it's going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years. Fold in the market numbers, see how those play out, and get to some sense of here we are now, here's where we could be, again, as an information tool. And what's important to connect all the dots on these, none of these studies really get to the level of, and here's what you're going to do about it, right? These are just information to then do further planning or to have recommendations, based on that. What I really liked about Breckenridge, Colorado, some of you may have skied there before. I wouldn't dare. But it really focused on the physical aspects of growth. So it looked at how you got to about their 1980s pattern, what 1980 to 2000 looked like, and 2000 to now, which we all know about housing issues around the country. Well, places like this are experiencing it in very acute ways. And they wanted to get their arms around short-term rentals, an issue that I know you all deal with. Wanted to get their hands around tourism. They want to get their hands around just basic the housing stock and how that's being affected in terms of affordability. Also thinking about facilities and level of service. And I think you all know, Tybee, Jekyll, I know there's some good analogs about the work that's been done. Observations from this work, though, just overall, I won't go through each of these. Again, point of view is not typical, meaning that, most of these studies do not then take the next step of recommendations, but use them as a foundation. Capacity is defined and it is subjective. It's based on the place, right? It's based on the culture. In some of this work, they've leaned on past plans and kind of the work that's been done with community engagement and previous work. Some of them, they were succeeded by a pretty robust engagement process that then took those numbers out and said, here's what we know, to get to that point of what does the capacity mean in Hilton Head Island. And again, I say very low engagement because this is really a data exercise, okay? This is a data exercise to get a lot of information put together and then to communicate. In terms of a conclusion, yes, the assessment, that it combines the best aspects, I hope, of these studies and other ones that we've pulled together for your review. Topics. Think about these circles as being really clouds, not hard circles. You all know that all these things are connected, but we need a way, I think, as we start to embark on the study, to organize, to create points of gravity, I call them, and let them circle around and really dig in. We'll use this precedent scan of the work that's been done by the community so far. We'll talk to you folks as we have. We'll talk to the community and stakeholders to get some thoughts about their curiosities, and build out a list of, let's think about these as big questions that we want to answer. I'll tell you one here in a second, but big questions that we really need to answer in this work. Jobs and employment, growth and development, physical growth and development, mobility, transport. I heard some talk here earlier about workforce housing, heard some talk about workforce training, skill development. We want to understand what systems are in place, what institutions are active. Housing, as you all know, is a critical piece of this equation. Where it is now, how it's changing, trends that are out there, resources, fiscal conditions, how all those things are interconnected. And that's not it. There's myriad other topics that we can get into, all the way down to governance and, this idea of interjurisdictional relationships, how you exist within your region, the relationships you have, hazard mitigation, and some special questions and trends that are out there. We're doing some great work right now as a community around this question of short-term rentals. I hate to keep saying it, but again, you're not alone in trying to deal with Airbnb, VRBO, and what all that means. But we want to fold those questions in. We want to think about access to medical services and all these other items, that are really on our list, and try to get smart in these areas and have data sets to support them. So before I quickly give a quick preview, I just want to pause here if there's any questions, discussion, thoughts for us on the process, the flow, the focus.
Carol, I have a threshold question.
Yes, sir.
When communities are doing this, do any of them or all of them consider a moratorium to freeze things where they are so that they can put a plan together while there's no further development? What do we do about that?
In the examples I've seen that are again, very analogous to what you're embarking on, a moratorium has not been part of it, primarily because the communities you're going to see that have done this work, there's, again, another common denominator. They're extremely dynamic. There's a lot of changes happening. Yeah. There's a lot of rolled up pieces of paper, stuffed in envelopes out front, development proposals, energy. I think politically it's been very tough for them to hit a pause button. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's not to say it's not unprecedented within comprehensive planning work that we've seen around the country. That has been part of it. It's typically in communities that are a little bit more, you can get your arms around, but it's not out of the question.
Carry on.
Yep. Quickly, I think we all know this, but I feel like I need to say it. A couple points about numbers. We just need to know as we do this work that the data is absolutely everywhere. Okay, we can know a lot. We can know almost every answer to every question you want to know. The key thing, again, is trying to make sense of that. Connect it to folks, connect it to projects, and see how it's going to affect your bottom line. In some ways, there's a value piece of this too, because you really are what you track in a lot of ways. You are what you measure. We want to know what the key benchmarks are. We want to come out of this with some data points that are digestible for you, that help you measure success and progress. And last thing I'll say on this slide, because I know you can read it in your packet, data is one thing, but when you combine data and intuition on a parallel track and you pull those two guys together, culture and real data, that's about as powerful as you can get, right? So as we work through this, we don't want to ignore the fact that there are people out there with opinions. That's not what this is about. This is about trying to have both legs of the stool working at the same time, and that third leg being the policy that you all are going to create something very, very stable. So maybe a simple question. It's not a simple question. And I think we're with a lot of these as we go through these, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on day-to-day because it's been 3 hours. It's almost 3 hours. I'm just going to give you a little flavor of how we might think through some of these. A lot of the questions we're going to pull into this are deceivingly simple. I think we start with, could be a data number, one that you can track over time. But as you start to unpack it, a phrase which I don't really like, but I'll use, you unpack it, there's a lot that goes into that. In a community like yours, this question is hard to answer, and it's actually subjective for a number of reasons. It's elusive, right? You had over 2 million people visiting this community, at the high point pre-pandemic. How do we count those folks? How about the thousands of people that come over on the bridge every day to work? How are they factored into this? How about the thousands of people that go the other way on the bridge? They work somewhere else but live here at night. There's a lot that goes into daytime, nighttime, summertime, wintertime considerations of just how many folks are here. 40,000-ish, okay, but the shrink swell of that is truly enormous. There's a number of things that that make you unique when it comes to just counting people, and I talked about the tourism industry and that. Defining the resident, is that important to us? I know these aren't questions. These are questions for us to think, not for us to answer today, right? How important is it to define that term as we move forward? Are there flavors of that term? What about the segments of our population? It's not just that we have 40,000 people. That 40,000, even if you're not growing very quickly, is moving, is changing, is aging, is diversifying, is moving around, is moving within itself. We need to know what those things are. And the reason I start with population is because if you're a doctor, you come in, the first thing they're going to check is your pulse. Let's think about the population really is that pulse. It's the lifeblood. We work in a lot of communities that have the opposite problem or challenge, I should say, that you all have, which is they've dealt with decline. And as we think about that, those are decisions that happen one at a time, right? Housing units play a big role in this. And again, when you talk about why does it matter, because this number does affect a lot of what we're going to discuss as we move forward. I'll only have one graph today, I promise. I can't make that promise going forward. But you see something happening here, right? As these bars move toward today and move out into the 2030, we see a slope that blows up 60, 70, 80. That bridge didn't hurt. 90, 2000, and then something starts to happen around 2000 where you see those arrows, our percentage growth over the decade really starts to come down. And we experience what we have, and again, the 1% to 2030 is a forecast. That's not a guarantee. That's based on decisions that will be made, some in here, some outside. We see slower growth and more stable growth into 2010 and 2020. And the 3766, that number is based on the 2020 census. Not perfect. Never read to the decimal point, right? It's always order of magnitude. But 37.6 is part of that full count, number. Could be 2,000 more, could be 2,000 less. But the key point to bring in this thing is that population change has slowed. It starts to get to our fundamental question of some of the easy decisions have been made, right? 10 PUDs on the island. But also growth within those PUDs. The population, the kind of intensity, regularity of that growth that we're seeing back on the mainland is not occurring as quick within the island. But at the same time, that also has implications. We think about housing affordability, availability. We think about tourism, because tourism has not slowed down over this period. In fact, it's gone up. We think about the airport, going from 40,000 arrivals to 117,000 arrivals, or a 200% increase with the extension of the runway. It's not that the dynamics here have slowed down or change has not slowed down. It's just rather that the population is beginning to plateau. So this is just one big question that we're going to dig into. And I don't have a lot, of other, roads to go down in this, just to understand that this is part of the equation, along with jobs, along with transportation, mobility, land use and growth, getting to big subjective questions like the green one I asked at the bottom, how many people ought to live. I don't know if that's good English or not. I'm sorry, raised by a man from Alabama, but people who ought to live on Hilton Head Island. These are critical questions for us to do, understand, to know what build-out looks like, and indeed to progress through this. But with that, I'll pause. Mark, Mayor, Council, any questions or thoughts?
David?
We're headed.
I don't have any questions because there's too much to absorb at one time. I think that I'll go back and read your outline, but well done. I think it's an important project for the community.
Bill?
If I heard you correctly, you talk about helping us evolve into or progress into data-driven decision-making. Let me create an example. You've heard earlier, cogent reasons why we should really get serious about workforce housing. How would you approach that problem so that we would have data available that would speak to perhaps the price we're paying for not having adequate workforce housing, the price we would have to pay to upgrade, if you will, our situation, and the benefit that might inure to us if we had an adequate source of workforce housing. For example, if I'm running a restaurant and my top line used to be $1 million a year, and that's when I could count on, by and large, 80 people working for me that day. Now it's dropping to, I'm lucky if I can get 55 workers. So my top line has dropped, my bottom line has dropped. So I'm paying the town less in terms of business license tax. And so if the town, I'll create a related example. If the town has land that they paid $1 million for, and it's on the books as that, but it has a market value of $2 million today, and it decided to liquidate its position if and only if workforce housing would go in there, but the price of the dirt is too high. So we take a hit, if you will, that you don't notice on our financials, that we chose to set aside $1 million if we were to sell it at 2. We give it at 1, but that restaurant now maybe goes from 60 workers to 75. The business license income starts to the economic rollout or impact could be for an individual working here could have a multiple of 8 times in the community. So can you help us with a situation like that?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think, Mr. Harkins, I don't know that we can necessarily solve for X within this, but I think what we can do is really, because I think a lot of this stuff, whether it's the Great Resignation, all these things get terms now, right? What you end up hearing is kind of notional or anecdotes about it, right? I can't hire anyone, or we can't staff up, and then what you all feel is the bottom line effect, the fiscal effect of that, whether it's in a business license, if it, God forbid, if they go out of business, it becomes a vacant use, property tax issues long term, dilapidation, all those sorts of things can play out in the long term. What we really want to understand, I think, from a workforce side, though, in this is really, what's the need and how is that need I mean, how is that demand being met with the supply? Where are those folks coming from? What are the kind of the burdens on their back in getting here? How has that changed over 10 years? How has that changed over 2 years? I think we need to know a lot more about the, looking at the number and cheating, the 20,000 folks that work here every day, 13,000 of which don't live on the island. And what's really affecting them. Again, you're not alone. Our Central Ohio region, our restaurants are struggling to stay open with staffing issues. And I don't know that anybody's written the white paper on why yet. But given your economy, given who you are, could be a particularly pernicious issue for you. So that's the type of question, like I asked with population, that might stand alone that we really want to spend some time on.
Yeah, and I think you've identified some of those ripple effects,
Multiplier, absolutely.
down to tax receipts in the community. It addresses traffic. We know there's 13,000 people coming onto the island every day for work. That creates traffic and concerns around that. People live here, they work here. We've helped that cause a little bit. And I think with that data-driven approach, your point about how does then the town participate in solving the problem, and if you have control of ground that you can write down the cost of, that enables the affordable or workforce or whatever you want to call it housing to occur, then you're part of the solution, right? And you've got good decision-making, backbone to that. And I think that's exactly, it's a great example of something that we needed to dive in deeper on.
And quite frankly, it's a great example of a regional challenge too, because again, 20% growth in the region, 1% growth. Well, as the region grows, the affordability is declining, and I think that's another key point to make in this is that your labor shed, the catchment area for folks that work on the island will necessarily grow, and the burden will grow with it.
And we know already just by doing some initial analysis that, multifamily occupancy is 100%, on the island. So, right there, that's a pretty easy story to tell. People can visualize 100%, and what that means. So we know there's need, so we just need to define that.
Thank you. Alex?
I can appreciate the swift timeline that y'all have put in front of us, okay? I want to thank you, Mr. Town Manager, for taking us down this road, okay? As I think back, when we embarked upon the visioning process, okay, one of the key themes was reinventing sustainability again. And I think that's kind of where we're going here. Ms. Jen Ray can appreciate this. We had a lot of folks that were working on our comprehensive plan that were very anxious to get to this point that we are right now, okay? Like, where are the solutions to a lot of the issues that we're talking about? So I'm glad that we're finally here. To that point, I'd appreciate that we really engage with the community, okay? And you mentioned stakeholders. I think when I look at your points of gravity, or you describe them as leaking buckets, when I look at those, I can tie back to our core values in our comprehensive plan, okay? And each one of those core values had a group of individuals that were working diligently to put some stuff in place. And I think re-engaging with them along the way is going to be so important to us, because we now have community buy-in to implementation, okay? We had it at the high level, but we need it again here, okay? Just to know that we hadn't forgotten what we talked about, a couple years ago. So I kind of view this as, I like what you said, Mark, community appraisal. I mean, it's really an analysis, okay, of our strengths and weaknesses and where we're trying to go. It's just so vital. And as you look at the charts of us kind of leveling out from a population standpoint, I think if you look at our visitation, okay, that's something that we need to keep in mind also. And it's not always us growing or sustaining ourselves through quantity, but it's quality, right? Like how do we really sustain ourselves from a quality standpoint, particularly with what's going on around us? So I think we can control the quality more than we can do anything else. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about this, looking to engage very heavily as we move through the process and help, you help us get smart on it, is important. So thanks, Kyle. And this was very easy to follow also.
I appreciate it, Mr. Brown. One thing I just bring back to you is that, and I would challenge this group and the larger community, I think, if there are questions that you need answers to, this is the time to ask them,
Sure.
I think, and you might not have the right words to put together to exactly articulate what it is you want to know, but the workforce, I think issues, Mr. Harkins, you bring up are fundamental. And if there are other issues like that, now is really the time to bring those to the table.
Tammy?
Thank you. So I used the word before when we were talking about the level of where the community's tolerance is.
Yeah.
Right? So, and you mentioned that intuitive aspect of how these numbers combine. And I think that's really important because really that's the measure that we need to work towards addressing. So the numbers will tell a story. They will identify whether or not our perceptions are accurate. We all hear exactly what it is that folks don't like about the island, about how things are functioning. And then we all know, too, from a recent survey that we had the pleasure of getting informed through the chamber about, that even with those problems, folks are pretty happy about living here on Hilton Head Island.
Yeah. I mean, it's Hilton Head Island.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And so having the numbers
Yeah.
to really separate, perhaps validate in some cases, perhaps in other cases reset a reality that our perceptions may not be necessarily accurate with, will give us the opportunity to address them in a meaningful way. Today's discussion, while primarily focused on our Mid-Island Park Tract and then the district around it, has also been focused on housing. There are other issues on the island to address that are important. And so while we have these discussions, I want to make sure that we stay asking the right questions of you to get the data that we need to check against our perspective, create a new reality, and then understand what the island's residents' tolerance level is. And not that it's just a number, and we can fill that number with all of this, but is that truly the new reality that we can all fall into and live with? We live with,
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
living with part here.
Thank you. Thomas?
Kyle, I think if you look at 1980 and what made Hilton Head relevant and compare that to what makes Hilton Head relevant today, it's probably not the same thing. And I think our challenge is to determine what's going to make Hilton Head relevant in 2030 and 2040, and make certain that we have the wherewithal to make that happen. Population growth has slowed. It's virtually level. Tourism has slowed. It's virtually level as well. So if you look at those two elements of quality of life, we're pretty close to capacity right now, the way things are. For population to increase, for tourism to increase, change has to occur. We just don't know what that change is. The Chamber of Commerce recently, in their role as our DMO, completed a community survey with 3,000 respondents. And they basically ask a couple of questions in a lot of different ways. Question one is, do you think tourism is important to the island? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. Does tourism have a negative impact on your quality of life? And their answer was yes, in season. So we've got an industry that really keeps the lights on and pays the bills, that we have to evolve into whatever is going to make us relevant in 10 years. Help us figure it out.
We'll do. We'll try. I think baked into that, we have a lot of real estate, individual real estate questions that are being asked and will continue to be asked with greater frequency. One of the things that really intrigues me about your island, and this is not dissimilar to a lot of communities like yours, is looking at that median age and the change over time. You're 57 median age. Greatest growth segment, 2010 to 2020 is over 65, 25% growth. More than half of your community now is over the age of 45. No offense, but that in the next 15, 20 years leads to some pretty significant real estate transfer. New decisions, new ideas, new perspectives on the island. Some of those are going to come from external. So we want to know and be armed sounds too strong. We want to be ready with the types of rules, but also incentives that create the island you want to live in 20 and 30 years. Because it's not going to be the same people making decisions.
It's not, and it's happened in the past 25 years. The little community I live in, Sea Pines, 25 years ago, 2/3 of the property owners were resident property owners, 1/3 non-resident. 25 years later, it's flipped. 1/3 are residents, 2/3 are non-resident. So the younger generation behind my generation that buys my house are going to probably turn it into a short-term rental. And that's increasing the challenge we have with short-term rentals. That generation doesn't have the same desire to live here that we did.
At the same time, you think about the last 2 years. Again, I get curious about this. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking. But we think about the work from home opportunities that have emerged in the last 2 years that absolutely did not exist for major corporations. That affects that changes this. I think we want to know how that changed some of these numbers in terms of permanent population. Semi-permanent, maybe, is a better word. All those things are baked in, absolutely. And we're doing some great work right now, and a team there on trying to get our arms around the short-term rental piece, which will get folded into this.
Mr. Glenn?
Thank you. Like David, I need to absorb this, and I need to understand it. You're throwing a whole lot of thoughts and concepts at me that maybe I've never really detailed and studied. But your first question, how many people live here? The simple answer is the census told us there are 39,600 people living here. That's how many people claim residence here. So to me, that's the wrong question. The question needs to be broader. How many people have the island as their central focus? Or how many people, consider themselves from Hilton Head Island? Or something like that. But how many people live here, it just doesn't quite get it for me.
And that was meant to be a little provocative, too.
Yeah. I understand.
Yeah,
And you succeeded in that. It's very important for us to understand the island conditions. And I think you're going through an assessment of that so that you can let us know. The term that you've probably heard this morning more than any other is workforce housing or affordable housing. That's a key factor for us. We understand that. And so we brought in a consultant a few years ago. The consultant came up with a plan. We've adopted most, if not all, of the plan, and nothing's happened. We didn't get the right advice. We don't have the right formula. I'm convinced that the town needs to get involved in public-private partnership to try and deal with that. It's not selling the land, that's leasing the land to that user as we're moving into it. And so we need to have an understanding of that. I've never been a professional futurist, but my assessment is that this community is becoming more of a bedroom community and less of a full featured economy. Witness the loss of business. The businesses that are remaining here are those that provide the needed services to the rest of us. Those that have left feel like they can do it someplace else. And so that's why I say I think we're becoming more of a bedroom community. I don't want to say it's a bedroom community of Bluffton, but I think it's a bedroom community of the broader region. We're all interested in what's going on with region here. I do some work or listen to some of the ideas that come about transportation, regional transportation. It's a huge issue that's ongoing. So I look forward to guidance from you. I will try to answer your questions from my perspective as I can, but I'm having trouble getting my arms around this now, and I'll study on it and look forward to it. But thank you so much for all of what you're doing here.
Ask a question.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Kyle?
Yeah.
Councilman Becker brought up an interesting and important statement about tolerance. I think that's, and the bottom line has to do with a political decision.
Yeah.
And we respond to the public, and so I think that's important. But I just make the observation that if I moved here today, I accept today's conditions. If I moved here 20 years ago, I may have a different perception of what today's conditions are.
Yeah.
So the question is, what are we going to land on? Was it 10 years ago, 25 years ago, 50 years ago? And then how do we combine that with the futurist decisions that we ought to be making? So it's complicated and interesting.
And as you know, David, you never land, right? I mean, in some ways, you're always a ship at sea. And you're changing, and you're going to continue to change. But the key things to have as part of that is some notion about what these trends are doing to you right now, good, bad, or otherwise, and a way of measuring that over time. And at the core of what we're doing, and I know it's big, and this is enough time to really dig into it, the core of that, we're just trying to know a little bit more about our space and our people.
What I would land on is our vision statement that had core
Yep.
values that theoretically are who we are.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, before you wrap up, I'd like to take a couple questions from citizens that are here today. Anybody have a question for you? Lance? Nobody has?
Mayor, thank you.
Identify yourself, please, Lance.
I'm sorry, Lance Pyle from Port Royal Plantation. Council, thank you for the work that you guys are putting in. Brian and the team, nice job with everything that you guys have done. Staff, thank you. I know you guys have put in a lot of time as well. You know, when we look at the Mid-Island Tract for us, it's our front door. Mr. Ames, you may not know, but that is part of the Port Royal PUD. That's part of the open space related to Port Royal and how that open space is used. I would argue there are restrictions on that property, and there are elements that would limit what could be put on there from that perspective. When we see the plans that were presented, we are very pleased at what we saw. I think overall, at the break, we had some discussion with some of our committee members, and the overall perception was that would be a nice asset to the community as well as to Port Royal. We are concerned about workforce housing. We understand and recognize that it's a problem here on the island. And Kyle, I think you have your hands full, because I think when you look at workforce housing, you have to look at the worker, you have to look at what the worker wants.
No doubt.
What workforce are we attracting?
Right.
You know, we talk about fire rescue, we talk about nurses, we talk about, those all also want to be homeowners. You know, they're not necessarily always renters. So how are you meeting that need, and how does that then translate from what you're offering? And so when you look at that, I think that has to be it's a much broader discussion. I know the town, you've done a lot of work on it. And I appreciate the tolerance level of Mr. Harkins is what are we islanders that live here willing to pay for services or to eat at restaurants before there's a break in that tolerance? So that is definitely a struggle. We just think for Mid-Island, we agree that the district has a lot to offer, but we're not sure that the park itself would make sense for workforce housing. So with that said, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Congratulations on the work that you've done. I was involved in port planning for a number of years, and I really appreciate the task that's ahead. And what you've done so far, I think you've laid great groundwork for the concerns of the community at large. Quoting two smarter guys than me, just a general quote about the meeting today, Confucius said, "The only constant in life is change." And yes, we are floating on a sea of change and will continue to. Mark Twain said, he said about statistics, he said there's lies and damn lies and statistics. And regression to the mean has always bothered me about statistics, but that's not what I'm not here to talk about. I'm more here to represent a more focused idea. I was asked to attend a meeting by some of our neighbors in Hilton Head Plantation about the security and safety of a project of this size. And I was a police officer in Savannah, Georgia for 8 years. I ran the midnight watch as watch commander, and I assure you that little 30-acre tract of Forsyth Park represented a number of challenges for us. So I wanted to encourage you to consider the safety and security issues, a site vulnerability assessment, and know what we're getting into and do it in the engineering phase rather than to suffer what many communities have suffered with these very large projects like this, to put this kind of money, this kind of effort, only to have crime destroy it. And I've seen that time and time again in our business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
And can we get his name? I didn't hear his.
What's your name, sir?
I'm sorry, my name is Randall Davis. I work with U.S. Safety and Risk Management. I live on Hilton Head Island. I've been here since 2010 and lived in Savannah prior to that.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Ryan, it's yours. Finish it up.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I think that concludes everything we had to say today. Sorry for taking so bloody long, but that was a lot of information.
A lot of information. Will there be a test on this?
Good meeting.
You guys. Good meeting.